dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga pulisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga pulisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan din ng kahalagahan ng pulisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan!
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socio-economic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Dapat po munang alamin or matukoy ang pangunahing problema ng bansa upang mapagtuunan ng pansin at mabigyan ng solusyon.
We should have specific goals, do research, and make a policy that is fair for everyone.
Walang problema sa pulisiya. Iayos lang ang pagpapatupad.
Bago patubas ang batas, pag-aralan muna gusto ng government.
Two things, clarity and execution. Both, you need the communication and monitoring. As simple as that.
Mandato ng Philippine Institute for Development Studies o PIDS na gumawa ng mga pag-aaral at pananaliksik ng mga polisiya at programa ng pamahalaan at magbigay ng rekomendasyon sa mga mambabatas sa pagbabalangkas ng mga polisiyang makakatulong sa ating bansa. Sinusulong ng aming ahensya ang evidence-based policy making upang bigyan diin ng kahalagahan ng polisiya na batay sa datos at policy research na sumusuri sa tunay na kalagayan ng ating mga komunidad. Napakahalaga ng policy research, lalo na sa mga panahong dumadaan sa krisis ang ating bansa.
Kapag pulisiya ay pinag-aralan, susulong ang bayan.
In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERP is here for you. SERP is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERP, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERP widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERP has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERP has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERP provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERP, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERP has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERP now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socio-economic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
Good day, everyone. Isang magandang hapon sa ating lahat. Welcome to the PIDS webinar series where we feature our policy studies and the insights of policymakers, program implementers, experts, and scholars. Through this platform, we hope to provide an accessible venue for evidence-based discussion of current and emerging development issues. I'm Sheila Siar, and I will be your moderator. For today's webinar, we will talk about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, the world's biggest free trade agreement the Philippines is a part of. Its ratification by the Senate in February this year completes the process for the country's participation in the RCEP. What opportunities does the RCEP present for the Philippines' services trade and tourism sector? What challenges and gaps must be addressed for the country to reap the benefits of RCEP? Well, these are the questions that we will answer this afternoon with the help of our esteemed panel of speakers. To start our conversation, let us listen to the opening message of Dr. Aniceto Orbeta Jr., the president of PIDS. Sir?
Thank you, Sheila. Good afternoon and welcome to our public webinar on boosting Philippine services trade and tourism under the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. First, allow me to acknowledge the presence of the following officials. Department of Trade and Industry, Bureau of International Trade Relations, Assistant Director Marie Sherilyn Akia. Department of Foreign Affairs, Assistant Secretary Mardumel Milicor. Foreign Service Institute Director General Maria Teresa Daza. Tourism Infrastructure and Enterprise Zone Authority, or TISA Manager Francis Randy Ortilano. League of the Philippines, Executive Director Veronica Hitosis. Philippine Travel Agencies Association President GR Formiliesa. Philippine Retailers Association Secretary General Evelyn Salire. Philippine Export Vice President Maria Florderisa Leong. MinCode Executive Director by Anayatin. And World Bank Senior Economist Ralph Bandor. I would like to greet the various representatives also from government, the academe, and the private sector, civil service, and media virtually present today, and those watching through the PIDS and SRP Facebook pages. As the world reels from the economic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, more countries are eager to bounce back to pre-pandemic growth levels. A key strategy to achieving this for countries and regional organizations like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, is entering free trade agreements. These treaties seek to increase trade among participating countries by reducing tariffs, opening new markets, and encouraging more investments. The latest free trade agreement signed by the Philippines is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP agreement, which came into force in January 2022. It was ratified by the Philippine Senate in February 2023, thus completing the process for the country's participation in the world's biggest FTA to date. RCEP comprises a third of the global economy, the 10 ASEAN member states, and 5 partner economies, namely Australia, China, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. Under the RCEP, the Philippines follows an international framework that enhances regional economic cooperation and emphasizes support for ASEAN's least developed countries. While trade in goods is expected to benefit from RCEP, services trade and the tourism sector also stand to gain. Trade in services is expected to increase the RCEP's providing the Philippines better market access and transparency of existing regulations. Aside from the domestic regulatory reforms, infrastructure and human capital investments will be required to help achieve the greater services liberalization of the country. The benefits of open access to most of the world's consumer market will benefit our workforce, as this will create more jobs. In addition, the spending power of member states will also grow because of RCEP, resulting in more travel and an improved outlook for the tourism industry. What stands out in RCEP, among others, is the commitment towards sustainable entrepreneurship, which includes small and medium enterprises, or SMEs. This good news because SMEs can compete alongside bigger firms in marketing local tourism products and services globally. Moreover, the influx of new investors and competitors in the market can encourage innovation and technology transfers from which local players can benefit. All of these are envisioned to further contribute to employment and generation of foreign exchange, the country's domestic product, and poverty alleviation. Today's presentation will help us understand how RCEP can boost the Philippine services trade and tourism. The first study, Opportunities for the Philippines under RCEP Trade and Services, authored by PIDS consultants Dr. John Paulo Rivera and Dr. Tereso Tullao, Jr., reviewed and assessed the specific commitments of the operated partners joining RCEP, particularly on market access and national treatment. The second study, Analysis of the Readiness of the Philippine Tourism Enterprises for Trade Liberalization in Asia and Pacific, authored by PIDS consultants Ms. Leah Gutierrez, Dr. Marie Gel Bautista, and Dr. John Paulo Rivera, examined the readiness of tourism enterprises for liberalization under RCEP and its comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, given their opportunities and threats to the tourism industry. We will also hear the representatives of the government and civil society. We have the Department of Trade and Industry Assistant Secretary for Industry Development and Trade Policy Group, Allan Gepty, who will share the department's initiatives to help the services sector reap the benefits of RCEP. Meanwhile, Safe Travel Alliance lead convener, Professor Maria Sherilyn Salazar-Rodolfo, will present her insights on capacitating our tourism industry to improve their global readiness for increased liberalization brought about by RCEP and CPTPP. To our attendees, I encourage you to enrich the discussion by actively participating in the open forum. We would be glad if you could stay until the end of the webinar. Thank you, and I give back the floor to our moderator. Sheila, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Orbeta. Friends, before I introduce our presenters, just some quick reminders on how to join the discussion. So you may post your questions and comments using the Q&A button. I repeat, please use the Q&A button, not the chat box. Please indicate your name and organization if you want to be identified when I read the questions. And to all the speakers, you may respond by typing your answers, which will be visible to all attendees. Alternatively, you can choose to answer the questions live during the open forum. And for our live stream viewers on Facebook, we highly encourage you to participate as well. Please use the comment section on Facebook for your questions. We will accommodate as many questions as possible that are relevant to the discussion during the open forum. Okay, so at this point, I invite you to listen to the presentations of our PIDS consultants. These presentations are from two studies sponsored by PIDS under the Philippine Apex Study Center Network, whereby PIDS serves as the network's lead institution and secretariat. We'll have first a study titled, as mentioned by Dr. Orbeta, Opportunities for the Philippines under RCEP, Trade in Services, authored by Dr. John Paulo Rivera and Dr. Tereso Tullao, Jr., who will present the study. Dr. Tullao is a university fellow and professor emeritus of economics at De La Salle University, Manila. He held several at DLSU in the past, including Dean of the College of Director of the Angelo King Institute for Economics, Economic and Business Studies, and Editor-in-Chief of the DLSU Business and Economics Review, among others. He was educated at DLSU, Stanford University, and Tufts University. Published several articles, monographs, and books in Filipino and English in the education, trade in services, movement of natural migration, and remittances. Dr. Tullao, sir, the floor is now yours.
Well, thank you very much, Sheila, again. And I don't have my presentation. I think you have it, okay. First of all, I'd like to thank PIDS and the Philippine Apex Study Center Network for providing assistance, financial assistance for the conduct of this research. My co-author, John Paulo Rivera, is here. And well, I'll be presenting on his behalf. Okay, next slide, please. So, well, this is the outline of our presentation, overview, brief review of literature, research design and methodology, results and discussion, and then conclusions and recommendations. Next slide, please. So what is the relevance of this regional comprehensive economic partnership? As mentioned earlier by Dr. Orbeta and Sheila also, Dr. Siar, this is the largest free trade area, okay, in the world today, comprising 15 economies in the region, constituting 28% of total global trade and total global output, and accounting for 30% of the world's population. So the regional trading arrangements is an answer to the stalemate in global negotiations. And we have done it through RCEP, and this is the biggest. So this is a second best to global trade negotiations. Okay. Next slide, please. Well, there are opportunities in RCEP, and we will cover these opportunities in trade and services. And then, of course, the key here is that ASEAN is central to this RCEP, no? Not as individual countries, but as 10 member economies. Okay, next slide, please. So our problem is, the research problem is, how can RCEP expand and deepen the contributions of trade and services in the Philippine economy through commitments made by signatory economies? And we have objectives. Next slide, please. First, identify and review specific commitments of ASEAN FTA partners joining RCEP. These are China, South Korea, New Zealand, Japan, and I forgot, did I miss something? Okay, but there are 5, okay? Then compare these commitments on market access and national treatment and evaluate whether these are relevant to the needs of the Philippines. And then identify specific additional benefits in trade and services that the Philippines can reap from RCEP, if any, and to provide analytical information for policymakers on the significance of RCEP that will generate recommendations on how the Philippines can harness the benefits from this economic agreement in terms of trade and services. Next slide, please. Okay, well, I forgot Australia. Okay, so the non-ASEAN signatory economies in RCEP are Australia, China, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand. So 5. And since our focus, it's a huge and a lengthy agreement, and the focus of our research is only on trade and services. As you know, trade and services covers 4 modes. One is cross-border transaction, meaning that the service crosses the borders. Example of this is digital education services. The second one is consumption abroad. An example is tourism. In this particular case, the consumer of the service moves to the territory of the producer. The third is commercial presence. Example is business services, where the provider or the producer of service move to the territory of the consumer. And lastly, mode 4, which is movement of natural persons. Okay, individuals, professionals in particular, move to the territory of the consumers of services to provide temporary service. Okay. Next slide. Because the Philippines is a major global services provider, then RCEP is very relevant and significant. Next slide, please. we will dispense with this review of literature. The thing that I will just mention here is that there are those who are against and those who are pro free trade agreements, and in particular RCEP, okay? Well, first, for those who are for, there are what we call trade creation effects. Those who are against are those who highlight the trade diversion effects, and also the impact of these trade agreements on the vulnerable sectors of the economy. Next slide, please. Okay. The research design. This is an analysis of the commitments made by the 15 economies. Okay. But in particular, in this particular case, we will just focus on the economies of the non-ASEAN members. Okay. Next slide. So it's really a review of the agreement itself and the additional commitments made by these 5 additional members in terms of market access and in terms of trade in services. Next slide, please. So the framework of analysis is a SWOT analysis, okay? In the SWOT analysis, we identify the strengths of the Philippines, okay? And these are based on, the unique or internal features of the Philippines that can reap the benefits of RCEP. Then, of course, we have also weaknesses. And weaknesses are limitations on market access and national treatment imposed by the Philippines. We made, limitations on market access and national treatment. Market access refers to the type of service that can enter the economy, and national treatment are the natural persons, okay, who can provide this service. And the Philippines has made restrictions on this or limitations. And that is an internal weakness, as well as the inherent characteristics of the Philippines services sector, okay? In terms of opportunities, the opportunities are the additional commitments of non-ASEAN signatory economies of RCEP above their respective free trade agreements with ASEAN. As you know, and we'll conclude that RCEP is a marginal agreement because this is really a compilation of free trade agreements of ASEAN with Australia, ASEAN and New Zealand, ASEAN and China, and so forth and so on. So they just compiled these and to include all our partner economies into one. And so I cannot understand why those who are against this RCEP, we should not be against it because we have already agreed to the free trade agreements in each individual additional economies. So the threats, these are external, these are limitations on market access and national treatment imposed by the non-ASEAN signatory economies on RCEP. Okay, next slide, please. So, and these are the results. And what are the opportunities? In terms of additional commitment of non-ASEAN signatory economies to RCEP relative to trade agreements with ASEAN member countries, on Mode 1 and Mode 2, particularly digital educational services and tourism, none. Next slide. In Mode 3, we have one, China, on business services. And in particular, these are on provision of legal services, as well as the provision of accounting and auditing services made by China. This is in addition to what they have committed in our free trade agreement with China. Okay, I mean we meaning ASEAN. Next slide. On mode 4, there are, all the 5 non-ASEAN signatory economies made additional commitments on professional services. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we're done with the opportunities, what are the threats? Okay, as I said, the threats are coming from the limitation on market access and national treatment imposed by non-ASEAN signatory economies. So on mode 1, okay, almost everyone except for New Zealand have limitation on market access and national treatment. Mode 2, there is none except for Korea on national treatment. On mode 3, there are for Australia, China, Japan, Korea, and yet New Zealand has no market access limitation and national treatment on business services. On professional services, okay, almost everyone has limitations. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of strength, what are the strengths of the Philippines that we can use to reap the benefits or the opportunities being offered by RCEP? One is competitiveness. So we have competitive cost structure relative to other services providers with business sophistication and innovation capability. In terms of strength in professional services, we have high participation rate in tertiary education, competitiveness of Filipinos driven by pursuit of tertiary degrees as a vehicle to secure job opportunities. Okay. In terms of language proficiency, we always mention this. Okay, our workers are proficient in the English language. Okay, this is our strength for business services as well as in professional services. And another area of strength is cultural adaptability. This is cultural affinity, close familiarity with Western culture, the Anglophonic culture, and religious systems. Okay, but I guess this is only relevant to Australia and New Zealand, and also some parts of ASEAN. Next slide, please. Again, part of the strength is the human resource development or the human capital. Our labor supply is educated, especially those who are leaving the country or rendering services abroad, okay, that can perform technology and business services, the capacity to produce knowledge and technology outputs, and the availability of critical mass of service providers. And then in terms of the strength in professional services, our Filipino professionals are comparable with the professionals in the ASEAN member states, as evidenced by our ASEAN mutual recognition arrangements in terms of education, curriculum, training, assessment, examination, accreditation, and certification and licensing. So, and in terms of government participation, this is another strength. There is a clear commitment from key government agencies to partner and reform, okay? And in particular, we have the DTI, okay? And also NEDA, okay? To improve baseline mapping, initiating research activities, establishing effective governance structures and investment models. The government, in terms of strength in professional services, government has been active in further expanding access and participation in tertiary education. We have free college education, now with RCEP, okay, while continuously improving quality of education. Next slide, please. Now we have now the weaknesses. In terms of weaknesses, these are commitments of the Philippines in the ASEAN Economic Community and RCEP on the limitations on market access and national treatment. And the Philippines has, well, we have commitments in digital education services, tourism, business services, and professional services. Okay, they said I only have 5 more minutes, okay? Let's skip this and let's go to the discussion. These are the weaknesses. Anyway, we will discuss this also in our discussion and conclusion. Next slide, please, okay? We only have 5 more minutes, okay? Next slide on the conclusions and yeah, okay. So no additional commitment by non-ASEAN signatory economies under Mode 1 and Mode 2. But there are limitations on market access and national treatment. Only China made additional commitments under Mode 3. Okay, next slide. All non-ASEAN signatory economies made additional commitments in Mode 4 with accompanying limitation on market access and national treatment. Therefore, we say that RCEP is really a marginal trading arrangement. Having said that, there still are benefits that we can reap. Next slide, please. So, conclusion, the benefits, RCEP can provide additional opportunities for Filipinos to generate income by providing business and professional services to both ASEAN member economies and non-ASEAN signatory economies. Next slide. The Philippines can view limitation as a call for government, academe, and professional organizations to upgrade the educational system, training, accreditation, certification, and licensing, and professional regulatory framework. It can serve as a challenge for business and professional service providers to continuously improve on their respective crafts to remain competitive. Next slide. Create developmental policies, this is from the part of the government, to further enhance strength on language proficiency and standards of education. In addressing weaknesses, we have constitutional limitations, domestic regulations, declining proficiency in the English language relative to world ranking, declining quality of education and training due to regulatory nature of quality assurance, limited graduate studies, among others. Let me talk about constitutional limitations. Partly, this has been addressed by the amendments in the Public Service Act. Okay. Next slide. Through RCEP, the Philippines can invite enterprises, investors, and professionals to go to the Philippines to engage in business. Okay, we can liberalize the economy so that foreign players can compete with domestic enterprises. Liberalization can be considered for industry where the Philippines has inadequacy like utilities, telecommunication, construction, and infrastructure. And I think this is being addressed by the amendments in the Public Service Act because they have defined a very limited number of utilities and the rest are open to foreign participants, higher than the 40%. In fact, even in critical infrastructure, foreigners can invest more than 50% if there is reciprocity. What is not allowed is state-run or state-owned enterprises to engage or to own part of our critical infrastructure. Next slide. I think these are the recommendations. So reform domestic regulation and liberalize professions. We have mentioned that, and particularly the amendments in the Public Service Act. Next slide. Conduct research and development to build human capital, because we need this to enhance our human capital and also for technological development. Okay. Next slide. Institute development, continuing professional development. Again, this is for our professionals, okay? Not the continuing professional development, because this is mandated by law, becomes a, just a seminar type. But really, okay, serious continuing professional development involves research, graduate education, publication, and the like. Next slide. Recommendation, or look into MRAs and domestic regulations. Okay. The mutual recognition arrangements, and the Philippines has entered into, I think, 8 of them. 8 professional groups have entered, and but the key in trade is really domestic regulations. We may liberalize and we may be compliant and comparable in terms of our professionals, but there are domestic regulations rooted on constitutional provisions that the economy should be controlled by Filipinos. And the practice of professions will only be done by Filipino professionals. And next slide, please. Improve business environment of the Philippines, make the country attractive to foreign investors. This has been mentioned, and this is being addressed by the amendments in the Public Service Act. Next. Address market access and national treatment limitation and weaknesses in construction and telecommunications. Again, being addressed by the passage of the amendments in the Public Service Act, because they have liberalized many sectors, okay, and redefined what is, and delineated what is public utility from public service. And there is also a Supreme Court decision defining ownership from provision of service. Okay. And next slide. I hope this is the last one. Well, thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. I hope, I didn't bore you. That's within 20 minutes. Thank you very much, Sheila and babes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tullao, for that compelling presentation. We'll have more chance to unpack your presentation during the open forum. So if you have any questions for Dr. Tullao and Dr. Rivera, you may type your questions in the Q&A box. Okay. At this point, let us listen to the second study, which looks at the readiness of the tourism sector for trade liberalization under the RCEP and another free trade agreement, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. This study was authored, as Dr. Orbeta already mentioned, it was authored by Ms. Ilia Gutierrez, Dr. Marigel Bautista, and Dr. John Paulo Rivera. And to present this study is Dr. Bautista, Assistant Professor at the College of Home Science and Industry in Central Luzon State University. She completed her doctorate in business administration degree with a concentration in hospitality and tourism management, and her Master of Science in Hotel and Restaurant Management degree at Holy Angel University. She has been recognized as an outstanding educator in hospitality and tourism in the EdCore Awards 2022. Dr. Bautista, you may proceed.
Hello, good afternoon. Let me now share my screen. Okay. Okay, so I would like to express our sincere gratitude to PASCAN and PIDS for giving us the opportunity to conduct this study. So again, mabuhay po sa ating lahat and good afternoon. I am Bautista, faculty from Central Luzon State University and a proponent of the study titled Analysis of the Readiness of Philippine Tourism Enterprises for Trade Liberalization in Asia Pacific. So this is together with Dr. John Paulo Rivera and our lead proponent, Ms. Ayla Ler Gutierrez, both from Asian Institute of Management Andrew Elton Center for Tourism. So the Philippines has been strongly emerging as a rising tourism destination, and the industry needs to prepare for its eventual recovery like what we are currently experiencing right now, prompting it to welcome a surge of both local and foreign tourists. So the concept of tourism enterprises is the facilities, services, and attractions which involve in tourism, but not limited to the following. We have accommodation, adventure and recreation, attractions, events and conferences, food and beverage, souvenirs, and handicraft, which is being manned or facilitated and assisted by the following, like DOT, PCBC, TIEZA, and the respective local government units. So the study has focused on tourism because of its important role for many economies, particularly in terms of its contribution to employment, entrepreneurship of local communities, the GDP, and the generation of foreign exchange, of which there have been various studies that have discussed trade liberalization and the concepts and implications of RCEP. However, there is no literature yet to support the indicators of preparedness of Philippine tourism enterprises for the impacts of trade liberalization brought about by RCEP and CPTPP. So to provide a background, especially with the public, the CPTPP is a comprehensive multilateral FTA between the 11 countries. And among its key features are comprehensive market access, fully regional agreement to facilitate development of production and supply chains among members, cross-cutting trade issues, and so on. While on the other side, RCEP is another proposed FTA involving many of the same countries as the CPTPP, which focus on economic and technical cooperation, the MSMEs, custom procedures, and trade facilitation, and so on. Okay, so such backdrop on RCEP and CPTPP, as well as its anticipated costs and benefits for the Philippines, particularly the tourism industry, motivated us to explicate on the potential opportunities that the tourism enterprises can harness while being cognizant of their readiness to participate and caution themselves. So since the focus of our study is the readiness of the Philippine tourism enterprises for the implications of these RTAs, there is a need to underscore the continuously expanding role of the tourism industry in economy, identify opportunities and threats to the tourism industry, and assess the readiness of the tourism enterprises in participating. So hence we address the research problem, specifically on how can tourism enterprises prepare themselves for the impacts of trade liberalization brought about by RCEP and CPTPP. And in addressing this, our general objective is to assess the readiness of the Philippine tourism enterprises to exploit opportunities and mitigate threats brought about by trade liberalization, which specifically we were able to address the following. First is to identify and review the anticipated impacts of trade liberalization to assess whether tourism stakeholders are ready and capable of exploiting opportunities and mitigating threats. Third is to recommend strategies for tourism enterprises on harnessing the opportunities. And lastly, to provide analytical information for policymakers on the kind of assistance that tourism enterprises would need to exploit the opportunities and counter the limitations brought about trade liberalization. So in furthering the existing discourses on trade agreements and tourism, this study evaluated the commitments on tourism underscored in the selected tourism agreements in Asia Pacific, or the APAC, namely the RCEP and CPTPP. More specifically, the respective opportunities and threats to Philippine tourism industry and the tourism MSMEs were identified. So in order to assess whether the tourism MSMEs can effectively participate and utilize the commitments under the respective trade agreements, the readiness of the various stakeholder groups, such as in accommodation, tour operators, food and beverage, transportation, and retail, were examined through an integrated action plan for SME development, or the SPAN framework. The SPAN framework encompasses key areas of business development needs, such as the human resource development, the access to finance, market access and development, technology and technology sharing, access to information, and alongside with the existing policy environment. So in addressing our research objectives, the methodology is designed to follow an IPO process following a 4-phase multi-tier design framework. The commitments on tourism underscored in RCEP and CPTPP, the insights from the various stakeholders serve as inputs that are subjected to document review on phase 1. Focus group discussion has been facilitated during the phase 2 of the study and KII with the phase 3 respectively. So to generate information and the data gathering methods are further subjected to validation, which is in phase 4. So to supplement in the scope and limitation, given the logistical limits posed by the pandemic situation in which this study was conducted, majority, if not all, data gathering procedure were conducted online and virtually through various digital platforms. Okay, so our document review is geared towards laying the foundation in addressing our research problem and objectives through an assessment of how the external and internal environment can change given the CPTPP and RCEP, as well as the examination of the Philippines' domestic characteristics and capacities. Hence, at the end of this phase, as what is presented, which is the process reflective of both internal and external environment, and of which the study have also further evaluation in the SWOT analysis, utilizing a SWOT matrix, matching and strategizing the opportunities and threats with the strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so the first underscored in the FGD is an intensive capacity building program that will train the various value chain members of the tourism. It's really worth emphasizing repeatedly that tourism is neither just an industry nor a group of some related industries. It is a grouping of many industries that work together to create experience. So consumers come to the product where the location or the destination itself is part of the product, and creating a spending worthy is conditioned on the experience that each value chain member will contribute. Hence, a unified training is really deemed to be necessary. So for instance, Philippines is positioning itself as a farm tourism destination and among others. But interest in farming among the population is really limited. The country is also promoting its untapped tourism destination, highlighting its nature-based and cultural assets, but the authenticity can be questioned because the locals are not active nor trained in showcasing their destination. So together with the hard infrastructure, and some of which may be present, and the soft infrastructure also has to be developed. Training can cover both hard and soft skills, and all of this can be helpful to the tourism industry and tourism-related MSMEs in catering to the demands of an expanded and tourism activities brought about by the Philippines' participation in RCEP and CPTPP. Next, during the phase 3, key experts and authorities from the tourism industry are unanimous also in seeing immense opportunities for tourism brought about by RCEP and CPTPP. And thus, these agreements have the capacity to stimulate trade activities. Membership in such trading agreements can help invite businessmen and investors to come to the Philippines for business and leisure, or bleisure, like what we are doing, or the leisure travel. So the business travel segment can transform into a leisure travel segment that can increase yields from tourism as business travelers stay and explore other parts of the Philippines. So likewise, because tourism is a value chain, the food and beverage sector can also benefit from the increased demand. As part of the consumption and spending of the visitors, this sector can also provide high quality products, drive improvement, and upgrade the local sector. This is a link between the trade and tourism that needs to be strengthened and be seen as an opportunity rather than a threat. So many stakeholders, particularly at the enterprise and frontline levels, view the Philippines as not yet prepared for the liberalized market marked by the tougher competition. However, aside from competition, These trading agreements can compel tourism stakeholders in the country to elevate the quality of goods and services and to improve existing product offerings. Hence, trade liberalization can be seen as a motivation to upgrade and do better, which will benefit the entire economy. So to prepare the stakeholders for the implications of these trading agreements, our key informant from the regional tourism offices has also emphasized that proper communication could greatly streamline understanding at the local level, even at the destination level, of the benefits of the costs and the costs of participating in RCEP and CPTPP. So specifically, the commitments and policies should be properly communicated and honestly explained to everyone, including those stakeholders on the ground. That is, they must gain awareness first on what trade liberalization is all about, what concepts encompass this, and what they could really gain from this. Awareness is a necessary condition for them to understand their involvement and how they can make the most out of it at the community level. So this has been captured by the FGD findings, and readiness for trade liberalization is conditioned on awareness of key stakeholders of what is in store for them. Okay, so a document review is validated from the responses of the stakeholders, and experts reveal that readiness of Philippine tourism MSMEs in trade liberalization alongside value for experience. So having the potential to compete and to elevate products and services, Philippine tourism value proposition has to be augmented and set with reinforced policies, preventive measures, and action plans. Okay, so proceeding now with the summary and conclusion. During the focus group discussion, there was an apparent lack of awareness about RCEP and CPTPP. While some key stakeholders have an idea about it, they admitted, though it's not that deep. Hence, the FGD became an avenue for them to made more aware about the salient details of RCEP and CPTPP, allowing them to see the benefits as well as the costs. So their responses have indicated a unanimous hesitation and worry about the country's participation in these trading agreements. However, they are open to changing their perspective if the following conditions would be present. First would be the infrastructure development. Second is planning. And lastly will be capacity building. With these elements in place, their confidence would be reinforced because they are equipped to deliver at par or above par the tourism experience, so an increased tourist influx. So at this point, our FGD results support the findings and argument of our document review. Our document review, the FGD and the KII support and complement each other, and the KII validated and built on the findings of the FPG, while the FGD provided primary data to the secondary data gathered from the document review. While we are expecting differences in the required preparations and assistance of tourism stakeholders for RCEP and CPTPP, given their varying backgrounds, expertise, and priorities, we have seen a convergence in perceptions among them. So the common denominators center on infrastructure, planning, and capacity building. So these are the areas that the national government can focus attention and resources on. Okay, so for the recommendations, in order to address issues in relation to information asymmetry, communication campaigns may be prioritized to increase awareness about trade liberalization. And one of the ways to jumpstart this for the government is to conduct several public fora, conferences, and discussion tables with experts, authorities, policy makers, and even the academicians, with the goal of addressing the stakeholder concerns and raising awareness about this topic. So with the help of the private sector also, the government may utilize media, both traditional and digital, or the social media, to disseminate information effectively. So to facilitate the successful transition of the tourism industry from the pandemic situation, both the national and the local government actors must continue to ensure safe travels, sustainable operations, and of course, more resilient stakeholders. This can be done through the enhancement in both hard and soft infrastructure, and these are all necessary to provide a seamless and superior tourist experience to visitors, marked by the Filipino brand of service that is unique to the Philippines. Hand in hand with promotional activities, infrastructures must be in place to fulfill its product's promise to tourists. And that is indeed more fun in the Philippines. So finally, ensuring the readiness and competitiveness of tourism stakeholders is equally important. Government agencies, as well as the private sector in the tourism value chain, may invest on capacity building programs that will enhance the way tourism is delivered to the travelers, tourists, and visitors, whether for business or leisure. A trained manpower across the tourism value chain guarantees the delivery of a seamless and superior tourist experience to visitors. And for an inclusive and all-encompassing human resource development, training must be diffused across the entire tourism value chain. So this will enhance the confidence of the stakeholders and frontliners to make tourists coming back to the Philippines because of the unique Filipino brand of service. And that ends our presentation. Thank you. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay po ulit tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bautista, for that clear and comprehensive presentation. Well, you've emphasized the importance of having an effective and efficient infrastructure for our tourism sector. And just last week, we had a really engaging discussion on our aviation sector and the enhancements of improvements in our aviation infrastructure sector that needs to be implemented in order to help our tourism sector move forward, especially after this pandemic. Okay, so at this point, now that we've heard the findings and recommendations of the two studies, let us first have a quick poll to get your views on a basic question. And as noted in the presentations, the RCEP opens many opportunities for our services, trade, and tourism sector. And in this regard, we invite you to participate in our poll. And here is our poll question. Do you think the Philippine services, trade, and tourism are ready to compete internationally? Okay, yes or no? Let us know what you think. And to answer, please click the Mentimeter link available on the Zoom chat box and in the comment section of Facebook. Just open the chat box to find the Mentimeter link. So do you think our Philippine services, trade, and tourism are ready to compete internationally? Okay, can we now look at the results on Mentimeter? Please, Meili. Okay, so, okay. Okay, so as you can see, majority answered yes, and this is quite encouraging because although there are still gaps that needs to be filled, most are still optimistic that the Philippines can compete with international players. And as mentioned by Dr. Bautista, we can view RCEP as a motivation, no? As an opportunity for the Philippines to pursue reforms, domestic reforms to improve the country's competitiveness. So thank you for participating in our poll. And at this point, let's listen to the reactions and insights of our discussants from the government, academia, and civil society. And we are honored to have with us two experts. Our first discussant is the Assistant Secretary for Industry Development and Trade Policy at the Department of Trade and Industry. We are honored to have with us Assistant Secretary Allan Gepty, the country's lead trade negotiator in the RCEP agreement. He also serves as the country's senior economic official at the ASEAN. And prior to his appointment, he was a commissioner of the Philippine Tariff Commission and Deputy Director General of the Intellectual Property Office. He is a lawyer by profession with diverse experience in international trade, intellectual property, public international law, and commercial law and litigation. He is a graduate of the Advanced Management Program at the Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania, and he obtained his law degree from San Bede College, Manila, and he also has a master's degree in law from the University of Santo Tomas. Asik Gepty, sorry, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Star, for that generous introduction. And also my utmost gratitude to PIDS for having me in this very important forum. And of course, I hope that all the attendees listening in this forum are all, I would say, equally energetic to the presenters earlier. I am tasked to give my comments and observation on the first presentation earlier. And for that, I'd like to congratulate first and thanks Dr. Rivera and Dr. Tullao for their research and study on the opportunities for the Philippines under the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. As we all know, trade in services is one area wherein I would say that not that popular to the general public or even to our policymakers, if I may say so. And when it comes to study, the same is also one thing. But if you are going to take into account the opportunities that it provides for us, the same is really vast, infinite, and definitely something that we can take advantage of as we move towards knowledge and creative economy. For the Philippines, we all know that our economy is basically heavily anchored on services. In fact, services sector basically contributes at least 60% of our GDP. And when you talk about services, we cannot afford not to talk about our people. And it's a given that one big asset for the Philippines is our people. Not only because they are young and dynamic, but as mentioned earlier, they are very versatile, very professional, very adaptive in so many fields of discipline. So in other words, as we transition towards knowledge and creative economy, this is something that we have to keep in mind. Our policymakers should keep this in mind so that policy directions must be charted towards empowering and capacitating our people. Just to give you an idea, trade in services is a growing key interest for the Philippines. And based on data, basically we have been consistently in surplus for so many years. So in other words, if in trade in goods, we have been unfortunately in deficit for so many years. In the area of services, we have been consistently in surplus. And in fact, our surplus, based on my recollection, as early as the latest, it is reaching to almost 13 to 14 billion dollars. So that's how I would say promising this services sector is. That is why this kind of study is something that we have to welcome because it provides us not just insights and inputs in crafting policies, but also give us a different perspective. Now, going now to my comments and observations on the presentation as well as the study, I'll start first with my quick observation on the findings as well as the rationale of the study. One is that it was highlighted in the paper as well as in the presentation that the RCEP agreement is basically a marginal regional trading arrangement, citing some studies to that effect. However, it is also mentioned, and this was highlighted also in the abstract, that the RCEP agreement is a forward-looking agreement or a forward-looking free-trade agreement. I think this is something that we have to reconcile and clarify in the paper for so many reasons. Number one, this is not actually a marginal regional trading arrangement. This is because the scope alone is very comprehensive. Maybe if the thesis is in the context that it is based on certain market access commitment, maybe that is something that you can juxtapose with existing ASEAN +1 FTAs. But one thing that is very important that we have to highlight is that in this agreement, basically the focus is more on rules and disciplines. So in other words, on the two aspects of the free trade agreement, more than the market access, the focus is more on rules and disciplines. So in other words, what are the laws, rules, and regulations that you have to adapt and implement so that you can established that create that conducive business environment. So I think that is something that we have to bear in mind. And it is in this context that this agreement was described as a forward-looking agreement because it has captured some emerging areas in trade, such as, for example, intellectual property, also e-commerce, and competition. Also, I noticed that it was highlighted that the RCEP agreement is basically a compilation of previous RTAs. I think this is something that we have to clarify and put also in context because every FTA is actually a separate and distinct free trade agreement, and it has its own merits and, of course, demerits for that matter. That is why when you analyze market access commitments, for example, in an FTA, you have to correlate that with the rules and disciplines that you have agreed in that FTA. So in other words, even without FTA, these market access are already there. But one thing that is important is that you have to take into account the rules and disciplines. So what do I mean by that? Let's say on matters of providing services or maybe investment, either you will bind your existing regime or legal regime or policies on that particular sector, or you will use the FTA as an opportunity to introduce reforms in the future. So in other words, this is one avenue by which you can also encourage and, of course, convince your legislators to basically introduce major reforms in the country. And of course, more than consolidating these rules, I would say that I think this is more of improving or clarifying, simplifying rules in various sectors. And also, it was also mentioned in the study that RCEP is an alternative avenue for trade liberalization. I think, of course, as one who led the negotiation and one who has perused the extent of the commitments and also the coverage of the agreement, I would say that RCEP is not an alternative. Maybe it would be more complementary to existing FTAs. And of course, the matter of whether or not one is more advantageous to one sector is, of course, would really depend on the circumstances of your sector. And lastly, I think we have to clarify also that this is not really, of course, this is my personal opinion, but not a challenger of TPP because number one, there's no TPP. We have the CPTPP. So I think in that context, we have to, in a way, clarify so that when the paper is studied, evaluated, in the future, the same can be properly contextualized. And then the most important thing is, of course, we'll go back now to the main question or the core of the study. And the core question tabled is, of course, how can RCEP expand and deepen the contributions of trade and services in the Philippine economy through commitments made by the parties? So reading this statement of the problem, immediately what comes to mind is that the focus is, of course, on commitments. And I would like to believe, upon perusal, that when you say commitments, basically it is focused on market access again and national treatment. Of course, I do understand the limitations of the study for that matter, but my personal viewpoint and maybe an insight which our researchers can take advantage of or can consider is that maybe it would be better if we can, in a way, correlate this market access and even national treatment to the improved rules introduced in the RCEP agreement. So in other words, if the context is what are the benefits, what are the advantages of RCEP that our stakeholders can utilize, I think it's very important that we factor in the value of these rules and disciplines. For example, we all know that we're very strong on BPO sector or IT BPM sector. We all know that we are also very strong on e-commerce. We have a very active business environment on e-commerce. So having mentioned this, what are the disciplines, what are the rules agreed upon on e-commerce? Are the commitments agreed upon, for example, on the provision on location of computing facilities or the provisions on data flow enhance our comparative advantage in these sectors? Are the improved provisions, for example, on the protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights, both in the digital environment and even in the physical environment, would in a way improve our comparative advantage in this area? What about domestic regulations when you talk about transparency? So basically, these are the rules, these are the disciplines that would basically increase and improve our competitiveness in the services sector. And notably, in the study, focus has been made on certain subsectors, like, for example, digital education, business services. So basically, those disciplines that I have mentioned on data flow, location of facilities, and even privacy are very important. So on this note, maybe my suggestion is that, of course, I would defer to the researchers, but maybe from the perspective of a policymaker moving forward, it will be best also to see that there is some correlations on the regime, because from the perspective of the investors, this is something that we are considering. Now, on the matter of recommendations, my apologies. I don't know if I have exceeded my time, but I'll
You
just
still have
quickly
time,
give a
sir.
comments. I just give a quick comments on the recommendation. On recommendation, of course, I agree with the recommendations highlighted by our researcher. They are very valuable. For example, on the matter of strengthening the linkages, reform domestic regulations, and even the liberalization of professions. I think this is very important because in positioning the country in this largest free trade area, we have always mentioned that the country is well positioned to be one of the hubs or centers of research and education, research and development, and also center of training and education. And this is because we have a very strong regime when it comes to our education, training, especially with the recent passage of Transnational Education Act. And also, for purposes of investment, we want to position the Philippines as one of the investment hubs in the region, particularly in the manufacturing sector. And there are many advantages on this that we can highlight. And then also, for purposes of benefiting from the RCEP agreement, we should look at it also not at the domestic perspective, wherein we are encouraging investors to come in and our people get to participate or partner with these investors. But we have to look at it also from the perspective of seizing opportunities outside in the RCEP countries. Because usually when we deploy people outside, the context is always on the basis of a labor employment arrangement. So in others, always contractual. But under RCEP agreement, particularly on trade and services, I think we have to be more entrepreneurial. So in other words, instead of us going to other countries to find a job, we have to go to these other countries to seize opportunities, the market access provided to us. So if we can set up small businesses there, we can set up small offices there. I think that is something that we have to educate our people. And then, of course, it was mentioned the need to create a conducive research environment. Yes, I fully agree with this. This is well aligned to the positioning that I have mentioned earlier. And MRAs was mentioned, but I would suggest that I think as far as recommendation, we have to be more aggressive in promoting the utilization of MRAs. So in other words, RCEP provides a platform for negotiation. So ZZIT, and then recommendations on promotion of developmental CPD, improve business environment. I mean, these are all recognized. On the matter of managing market access and national treatment limitation, there was a mention of some, of course, constitutional limitations and even restrictions on our laws, rules, and regulations. But offhand, we can also look at this limitation as, I would say, strength for the Philippines because it provides an avenue for our people to partner with foreign investors. In any and all events, I think the study was, or the discussion paper was released January 2022. So it was in a period wherein we're still looking forward for the effectivity of some major economic reforms and even RCEP. I think it's important to, in a way, adjust or update that to date we have already passed the necessary amendments to the PSA, the RTLA, the Foreign Investment Act. It's a good thing that the decision of the Supreme Court in Tanyada versus Angara was mentioned, that basically put imprimatur to the legitimacy of the Philippines making certain commitments in an FTA, particularly on market access. The case of Tatad versus Garcia, and also the clarification on the difference of owning public utilities vis-a-vis operating public utilities has been clarified. And this has been reinforced also by the amendment of the Public Service Act. But even before the amendment of the Public Service Act, I think it bears to stress that under the Constitution, the limitation is only on the operation and management of public utilities, not on ownership. So therefore, for purposes of corporate restructuring, you can have a separate corporation owning the facilities and another corporation operating or managing the public utilities. And under our regime, corporate layering is allowed. So this is something that I think at least be mentioned, so that one who is reading the benefits and advantages can already have an idea on how to navigate, I would say, our quite complex and intricate legal regime. But what I'm saying is that still there's a way forward. So basically, I think those are the points that I can share to you this afternoon. And again, my utmost congratulations and gratitude to the researchers. This study will surely help us and, of course, our stakeholders in optimizing the utilization of this very important free trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASEC Allan Gepty, for your thought-provoking comments on the first paper. Now let us move on to the second discussant for her insights on the second paper. And our second discussant is both an academic and a civil society leader. Let us all welcome Professor Salazar-Rodolfo, an economist of the University of Asia and the Pacific, or UANP. Professor Rodolfo obtained her PhD in economics from the Ateneo de Manila University and her master's degree in industrial economics from the UANP. She is a member of the Board of Advisors of the Dr. Andrew L. Tan Center for Tourism and a convener of Safe Travel Alliance. Professor Rodolfo, you may proceed.
Thank you and good afternoon, Dr. Sheila, Siar. Thank you to Dr. Orbeta and the Philippine Institute of Development Studies for inviting me as discussant for the paper of Ms. Gutierrez, Dr. Rivera, and Dr. Bautista on the analysis of the readiness of Philippine tourism enterprises for trade liberalization in Asia Pacific. So in my discussion this afternoon, I will concentrate on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or the RCEP. So first of all, congratulations and thank you to the authors for their research. And I commend you for the triangulation approach that you pursued and the significant attention that you actually gave to securing the stakeholders' views about the opportunities, threats, and interventions needed to raise the level of readiness to the effects of RCEP. Next slide, please. So the study revealed the low level of awareness relatively about RCEP among the tourism stakeholders, the limited but not zero opportunities to participate in liberalization activities, and the challenges in relation to mutual recognition and standardization of skills and capacity development. And the authors also concluded that the pillars of readiness are threefold, namely effective planning, capacity building initiatives, and infrastructure development. They also discussed extensively the strategies on how the Philippines can use its strengths and mitigate its weaknesses to take advantage of the identified opportunities. So the authors actually had a very good exposition about the sources of these trends and the weaknesses that were identified from the literature review. And I also would like to add to that, of course, the results of the different competitiveness rankings about tourism that have been published in recent years. The author's objective to identify and assess the opportunities is truly relevant to stakeholders, whether they be enterprises, primary or secondary enterprises as defined by the Tourism Act of 2009 or RA 9593, the government, national, regional, and local government units, and destination managers, because we are all looking for ways to accelerate recovery from COVID-19 and to achieve higher growth trajectory in the post-COVID-19 period. So the idea is really to find ways on how we can harness the potentials and opportunities in RCEP in the coming years. And last May 15, the Department of Tourism already launched the National Tourism Development Plan 2023 to 2028, which I think should also be utilized by stakeholders in order to find ways to accelerate recovery from COVID-19. Now, in the next slide, I would like to show the opportunities that were identified by the authors in their studies under RCEP and also the CPTPP. There were four groups of opportunities, namely, first, the growth opportunity in local tourist sites. They gave emphasis on local tourism growth and development. The second is on sustainable entrepreneurship and economic growth. The third is enterprise innovation and resilience. And the fourth is tourism development. So it's very interesting that the opportunities identified actually went beyond, the usual analysis of looking at just, let's say, the economic impacts or the economic effects of trade agreements, because it's very important, and as mentioned, since there's a specific, I think, a set of provisions on MSME in the RCEP, that we really give attention on how through the agreement, the stakeholders can work together in order to upgrade the participation of the tourism MSMEs in the global tourism value chain. And on the growth opportunities, I just would like to focus my discussion on the fourth item under growth opportunity in local tourist sites, and that is the perceived potential of increase in tourism demand and tourism flows. Why is that? Because there was this study by the Economic Research Institute of ASEAN for ASEAN and East Asia, or AREA, that for some RCEP members, such as, let's say, Thailand, Australia, Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, New Zealand, Cambodia, and Myanmar, their tourism sector have actually shown trade surpluses in years. And for economies such as China, Singapore, Republic of Korea, the Philippines, Laos, People's Democratic Republic, and Brunei, they have actually experienced trade deficits in tourism. So this actually shows also like some would really view it as an imbalance, but given that we're discussing RCEP, we now see it as an opportunity actually to find, let's say, ways or mechanisms in order to increase our export revenues or export earnings in relation to this very high volume, of course, of outbound Philippine tourism that is happening. And I don't believe that that should be restricted, but in fact, that should be encouraged, because it's through this exchange of people's flow, people connectivity, that we will eventually be able to also benefit from the upgrading of products and services, because more and more of our people are also getting exposed to the different technologies and different ways of doing things overseas, and particularly in this RCEP block. So the question is, are we not topping the RCEP block of economies today? Next slide, please. In pre-COVID-19 period, which was 2019, the RCEP block or group of economies accounted for about 64% of the 8.26 million international tourist arrivals, driven by, of course, four major source markets, namely South Korea, China, Japan, and Australia. Collectively, they already accounted for about 57% of the 8.2 million 8.26 million international tourist arrivals that we hosted in 2019. And this relative structure has not really changed in the past 5 years. Intra-ASEAN travel is still relatively low. We have not really sustained beyond, let's say, 10% share for ASEAN visitor arrivals to the Philippines. And there is significant room to actually expand this markets, because we have not really actually captured a significant portion of the outbound travel of this RCEP economies, both in terms of value and also volume. So some would say that even without RCEP, we can actually work our way towards increasing our share in this source markets. Yes, that is very much possible. And if you look at the ranking, we actually still have some source markets that are not part of the RCEP block, but which are actually very big contributors to our international tourism industry, or the Philippine tourism industry as a whole. However, I would like to argue that the advantage of RCEP is that it provides a broader platform for exchanges and dialogues and opportunities to form also, let's say, institutional setups like working groups where tourism can be part of the priority agenda, similar to what we have done in ASEAN for people, physical and cultural connectivity. Next slide, please. According to the authors, there is a perceived potential of increase in tourism demand and tourist influx in the post-pandemic period. Truly, the data show that RCEP block, so when we're trying to look forward to, let's say, this period of 2030, where we want to have to experience higher capacity in tourism development, that the RCEP block represents 2.1 billion of the world's population and 30% of the world GDP today. In a study by the Asian Development Bank in 2021, there was a projection that by 2030, RCEP will increase the income of member economies by 0.6%, while adding $245 billion and 2.8 million jobs to the regional economy. This means that the RCEP block in itself has the spending power for travel, and the flows or the numbers today and tomorrow. So, but of course, we know that it is up to us to decide on how to strike the balance between this creating higher yields and also the numbers that could actually still be tapped in order to support a number of our destinations, most especially those that are geographically isolated and disadvantaged at the moment, but of course supported by infrastructure. The country right now, or in the short term, can already capitalize on the business tourism, or if you combine it with leisure tourism, what we call bleisure, which was also mentioned in the study of our authors. These are opportunities anchored on what have been discussed a while ago on investments, trade expansion, global value chain integration. So indeed, the Philippines has the opportunity to leverage the liberalized sectors under, for example, the Public Services Act Amendment, retail trade, and also the Foreign Investment Act, and also the other sectors that have been liberalized under the RCEP and also the other agreements that are now forming, that are now the building blocks of this RCEP agreement. However, it would be also helpful and enabling if investment promotions and travel trade development activities will be conducted more and more here in the Philippines, so that we have the potential to boost this segment, the bleisure, so that we can bring more and more of these investors and business groups to more areas and destinations outside of the country. And I would like to mention also domestic tourism, because the Philippines, as member of the RCEP bloc, stands to benefit from this agreement. Again, the study of ADB showed that by 2030, there would be an incremental increase of about $2 billion for the Philippines, equivalent to about 0.3% of the GDP. I mean, the incremental change. So that translates also to spending power for travel for us, Filipinos, by the time. Now, business tourism is very crucial, and it has been mentioned that whether it be manufacturing, agriculture, or services, we could actually use the RCEP as motivation, as a driving force to really become more aggressive in bringing in the investments. And a study by the World Travel and Tourism Council showed that business to travel or business tourism is a catalyst for growth, and it actually is very integral to the relationships, investments, supply chains, and logistics that support international trade flows. And in fact, it could actually stimulate the creation of infrastructure and jobs that are needed for transportation, accommodation, and other services because of the nature of the demand for products and services by this business travel. But our institutional setup right now needs to be modernized, and there should be innovation destination so that we could cater more and more to this business, tourism, business travel, which, let's say, economies such as Singapore have actually been investing in significantly. Next slide, please. There are also other previous slide. There are also product opportunities such as educational tourism, nature-based tourism, culture, and heritage. And based on the market preference of just, let's say, the top 3 markets, Korea, China, and Japan as an example, some of them, let's say, demands of this market segments include, for example, slow regenerative travel, meaning including the need for fun and laughter to be satisfied, gastronomy, educational, cultural attractions, and shopping, some of the products that have been identified in their list of product preferences. But most importantly, there is a need to promote promote ease of reach and ease of getting around in the destinations. Now, some actually wonder why longer distance destinations such as Thailand, which are actually about 7 hours away, let's say, from markets, source markets such as Japan, are getting, let's say, more, not just in terms of volume, but even of high-yielding market segments compared to, let's say, Philippines, that is just about 4 hours away from the source market. Well, it has been shown in surveys that Thailand, for example, offers mix of ease and convenience, product portfolio, number and variety of accommodation choices. So, and which means that we need to look at how we can actually take advantage of this, let's say, strengths of our partners in RCEP, so that we can foster, let's say, economic cooperation with them, and that we benefit in the process. Now, another, let's say, opportunity, and I think this is in relation to, for example, science and technology, ICT, more and more of our source markets, especially the young population or the young groups, are using, let's say, AI-driven applications, gamified marketing and promotion. So that's something I think that we could also consider as part of future economic cooperation arrangements with the RCEP member economies. Now, there's also another point that needs to be emphasized as we try to evolve, let's say, products as part of the set of opportunities. There are markets or source markets in the RCEP block that are that already have a changing demographic profile. So they are actually experiencing the aging of their populations, but still we have a relative large base of young people in the ASEAN, where, for example, products such as nature and adventure would be very would serve actually as good match. And the country as an archipelago is also endowed with these kinds of assets. Now, in the next slide, the limitations were mentioned in the study, and the authors highlighted that these limitations are related more to the market access and national treatment in modes 1, 3, and 4, which are more related to the ability of our tourism enterprises and tourism workforce to expand presence abroad, to establish and expand presence abroad, and therefore expand their income opportunities. However, in terms of, let's say, expanding our export opportunities, export earnings from tourism under the mode 2, majority of the constraints to these opportunities or our ability to utilize trade agreements are linked to other international and national agreements, policies, regulations outside of what is actually covered in RCEP. So, for example, air transport services are covered by another international framework of agreement, which is the Chicago Convention. And however, as we have seen in the case of ASEAN and our partners, there's an opportunity to actually achieve open access to markets under, let's say, open skies agreements. Now, the authors also identified pillars of readiness as part of their conclusion, and they mentioned that there are 3, namely effective planning, capacity building initiatives, and infrastructure development. And I was actually requested to also contribute to the, let's say, set of capacity building initiatives that could be undertaken in order to increase the readiness of the Philippine tourism industry for RCEP. So I won't mention anymore of course, the threats and the negative effects, because they were also already mentioned by the author and also our presenter, Dr. Bautista, earlier. In the next slide, I would like to contextualize actually this capacity building initiatives. So this is the list that was identified actually in the study, ranging from sustainability, which actually is very good that it was identified here, leadership, and down to public speaking and communication, among others. Now, I would like to contextualize this capacity building initiatives within the framework of the seamless journey. Next slide, please. So seamless journey in the sense that if we are to take advantage of the opportunities in RCEP or even in other source tourism markets, this seamless journey framework identifies actually the major challenges being faced by the industry today. And the solutions to these are actually beyond the text of the RCEP agreement. So, but what I would like to emphasize is that RCEP in itself opens up opportunities for us to work together with the member economies to modernize, to remove these choke points or pain points in travel in the value chain and logistics network of the tourism experience. And this is where the capacity development should be prioritized. I will not use the term capacity building initiative, but more of capacity development, because there are actually institutions that need to be modernized and transformed. There are processes that need that would require innovation. So, for example, in the pre-trip planning, this is where local government units will become very important stakeholders, because it's very important that the curation of, let's say, narrative tourism stories would be prioritized in their planning processes or in their strategies. And then border control, because for markets such as China, they still face visa restrictions. So I don't know when we will reach that point where we will have something similar to a grab and go type of a visa upon arrival for these types of markets. Would it require, let's say, increasing capacity of our offices in these markets to grant or issue visa so that we could accelerate recovery of these market segments? Modernization of our border control facilities and agencies. I think up until now, we still are governed by the Philippine Immigration Act of 1940. It's a Commonwealth Act. And we are modernizing, liberalizing services sector, but we have actually these institutions on border control that really merit actually modernization and significant attention. Digitalization is key, not only in terms of the processes, but also smart ticketing and payment systems. So this is one capacity gap that we have in the industry, or the one that is actually affecting also our ability to serve our markets. And then, of course, up to the destination, we have concerns on infrastructure that were mentioned actually in the study, and where product development is actually an area of capacity development that the LGUs and also that the LGUs can invest in, and where national government, let's say through the DOT, would actually be able to support. So I think I'll end my discussion points here, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Rodolfo. Well, thank you to both our discussants for your comments and insights. And before we go to the open forum, our authors may have something to say in response to the remarks of our discussants. For instance, in the ASEC Gepty Gepty's comments, one of his key comments was in response to the description of RCEP in the paper of Dr. Rivera and Tullao of RCEP being a marginal trading agreement. And I remember ASEC Gepty clarifying that RCEP presents key benefits to the trading partners, such as improved rules in IPR, e-commerce, and competition. So in effect, it is far from being a marginal FTA or having a small effect. And our authors, Dr. Rivera and Dr. Tullao, may have a response on this comment. Please go ahead, sir.
Sino? Ako? Huh?
Yes, sir. Or
JP.
JP, whoever is available.
First of all, thank you for that comment. Okay. The reason why we said it's a marginal agreement is because it is, in terms of the additional commitments, okay, made by the 5 signatory economies. Now, in terms of rules and disciplines, okay, I think it can be speculative because, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Rodolfo, there are other international agreements and other liberalization measures that improves our regulation as well as our discipline. So we cannot say that this is because of RCEP. I like what you, the term that you use, correlate. We can only correlate, yeah? But we cannot assume that this was due to RCEP. When our legislators make legislations, it's not because of RCEP, it's because there is a need to liberalize. There is a need to improve our human resources. But having said that, thank you very much for your insightful comments. Again. Baka JP, meron ka, no?
JP, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, ASIC Gepty. Thank you so much for the feedback that you have mentioned, and we'll look into the clarifications that you have raised given the recent ratification and the response of the stakeholders to that ratification of RCEP. And there have been many reports, papers, and to some extent working drafts regarding the initial reaction of stakeholders on RCEP. And in revising the paper, in looking into the revisions in the paper, we would certainly look into those clarifications that you have raised. Thank you, thank you, ASIC Gepty. And Dr. Rodolfo, I would also like to thank you for the comprehensive analysis that you have provided our paper, and the perspectives that you have raised would certainly zoom in on what is needed by the MSMEs, particularly of the tourism sector, to be able to harness the benefits of RCEP.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rivera. You co-authored both papers, I remember. Yes, and thank you to Dr. Tullao for the response. May we hear from Dr. Bautista? Is she still in the meeting room?
Dr. Siar, I think I would respond on her behalf.
Yes, please, Ms. Gutierrez.
Yeah. Yes, so on behalf of the other researchers, Dr. Bautista and Dr. Rivera, I think I'd like to, of course, thank first of all Dr. Rodolfo for her very insightful comments, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Tullao. I was actually taking down notes while she was presenting her insights, so it's definitely a learning experience as well in that sense. But one thing I would like to highlight, I think that's very important, that was, I think, also raised in one of the questions here in the chat group, in terms of the value or the role of digitalization and technology in this sense. Part and parcel of really capacitating and enabling the tourism stakeholders to benefit from RCEP and in other trade agreements is that we also upgrade and improve the value of the tourism value chain through technology and digitalization. So as mentioned earlier, I think the key aspect or the key insight that we learned from our study is that communication and information dissemination is very important. I mean, a lot of stakeholders still don't know what RCEP means or what trade agreements actually mean for them. So I think this is where technology and digital platforms can actually pave the way for a better understanding on the benefits as well as, the possible risks and the changes that are necessary to ensure that they can actively participate and utilize the benefits of trade agreements. I think Dr. Rivera wanted to add something.
Go ahead, JP.
Okay, so in addition to what my colleague Ms. Gutierrez has said, the feedback of Dr. Rodolfo is also coming in very timely, especially that we are now amending or making amendments, making reviews of the Tourism Act of 2009, and the inclusion of the discussion of RCEP would be critical in making improvements in our Tourism Act that will allow our Philippine tourism industry to grow better, to grow more, do more, since recovery from the pandemic is a must, particularly for those who are at the micro, small, and medium enterprises of the tourism industry. That's all for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. JP. Now let us look at the questions on our Q&A box. And I noticed that most of them refer to goods in trade in goods, and a few on agriculture, which are both beyond the scope of the two studies, unless you would like to cover this, no? But there is a question here, ASEC Gepty, which is specifically addressed to you from Daniel Agustin. He said, if RCEP is rules-based, where shall we go if there is a dispute between and amongst countries? Shall we go to the WTO for resolution, or is there another venue? ASEC?
Okay. Thank you for that question. It would really depend. Number one, there are several free trade agreements that we have entered into. There are also several multilateral agreements that Philippines is a party to. So number one, we have the WTO. Number two, we have, of course, the ASEAN agreement. So we have the ATISA. We have, of course, the ASEAN +1 FTAs. So it would really depend on the nature of the issue or the concerns that you want to elevate for a possible dispute resolution. So, of course, the WTO is one platform. In RCEP, we have a very, I would say, forward-looking way also of addressing dispute. Maybe just to give you an idea, more than the dispute settle mechanism under RCEP, we also have the RCEP Joint Committee. And notably, one of the functions of the RCEP Joint Committee is actually to interpret provisions of the RCEP agreement, not only as far as the scope, but even on the application in itself, and to decide on matters elevated to the RCEP Joint Committee. So in that sense, in a way, there's a mechanism by which you can trace out certain issues. Of course, it will not prevent you from invoking other FTAs because, as I mentioned earlier, free trade agreements, they are separate and distinct from each other. They have their own merits, they have their own advantages and disadvantages. So for purposes of optimizing the utilization, it would really depend on the sector that you are into. So if you think that, let's say, an ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA is more advantageous to you, you can always make use of that FTA. Because again, one thing, maybe I will just highlight Doc Sheila, because one thing that we have to bear in mind in an FTA is that in an FTA, more than the conventional market access that we have or notion that we have to bear in mind that the trend right now in negotiation is more on rules and disciplines. Because we want stability, we want predictability. In fact, as much as possible, if you want a higher level of commitment, you want to harmonize the rules, if that is possible. But of course, there are certain limitations, such as the levels of development of the parties.
Okay, thank you very much for that, ASEC Gepty. Okay, let us spend a bit more time to clarify or expound on the points mentioned by our speakers. Let's say in the first paper, among the different as we can glean from the presentation of Dr. Tullao, among the different modes of supply, the Philippines stands to gain, particularly in mode 4, no, or the movement of natural persons. Now we have the MRAs, the mutual recognition arrangements, as a policy instrument that can facilitate this, no. And Dr. Tullao and Rivera had a study on the MRAs a few years back. Among Dr. Tullao, among the different professions with MRAs, which among these have high uptake, and how are these MRAs helping to promote greater Or how are the MRAs facilitating greater liberalization in terms of the movement of natural persons? Sir?
It's not to me. Okay. The mutual recognition arrangements are made to make the qualification credentials of professionals comparable. Now, they want to move, that's another question. Because movement is ruled by immigration policies, economic needs tests, and domestic regulations. So if the domestic regulate, even if Filipinos, the credentials of Filipino professionals are comparable with the ASEAN, if our trading partners are very strict about the practice of professions, then we cannot. And that is the reason why the recommendation is to really, beyond mutual recognition arrangements, we really have to have more liberalized domestic regulation measures, because that's the key. Okay, even here in the Philippines. Okay.
So among the 5 non-ASEAN trading partners in RCEP, saan nyo nakikita yung magkakaroon tayo ng bottleneck when it comes to the MRAs?
Yeah, okay. Well, honestly, I don't know. No.
If I may take the crack on that.
Yes, please, JP.
Well, among those non-ASEAN member economies, it's actually China that has a very strict protocols. They have a very high requirements, particularly for accountancy, that even if you have already passed the board exam here in the Philippines, you have an international license, for example, China has its own requirements that is particular to different economies as well. They're more stricter in terms of their domestic regulations.
Well, related to that, if I may add, and this is also to echo what the Assistant Secretary mentioned earlier. Okay, although China may be restrictive, but in terms of business services on legal services and accounting services, they allow foreigners to partner with. Okay, now, well, of course, you want to partner with China because China is a big economy. Now, my question is, are we attractive enough for other economies to partner with us, or service providers in professional services to partner with us?
Thank you, Dr. Tullao. As a Gepty, you have something to say, sir? Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Sheila. I just want to share my insights on the matter of mutual recognition arrangement. Number one, we have to bear in mind that this is one offensive interest of the Philippines, noting that we're very strong when it comes to competency of our professional. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is one area that Philippines should be very aggressive in promoting not just the purging, but also the utilization of the mutual recognition arrangement. There are 2 areas by which this can be of use for our people. Number one is, of course, the qualification requirements. On this particular aspect, it would be best if we can purge many MRAs with our trading partners in such the way that in terms of qualifications, our professionals can be recognized. The second aspect is, of course, the recognition of the profession in itself, your license. And of course, this is quite challenging because in some trading partners, their jurisdictions would be, I would say, protective in the same manner that in the Philippines, we are also protective. But taking into account the different modes of providing services and the opportunities that a larger free trade area provides, I think this is something that we have to educate our people. So for example, it was mentioned earlier that China opened their legal services for purposes of having a commercial presence in China. So what does it mean? It means that China is committing that as far as setting up your law office in China, you are free to do so. You're okay to set up your law office. And what can you do there when you set up your law office? So definitely, you can engage with a lot of maybe would-be investors who would like to set up businesses here in the Philippines. Then basically, that's clienteles for you. So in the process, you are gaining clients outside of the Philippine jurisdiction, but also in China. Of course, there are limitations. For example, appearing in court before China, which is understandable because it will not be, of course, advantageous for you arguing in Chinese or starting or learning the semantics, the mannerism, the approaches by which you can convince the Chinese court. So in other words, there are several fragments or areas of practice of law. So this is just an example. That's why I cited earlier that maybe in promoting trade in services, more than the usual approach that we are doing on the contractual aspect of labor, we have to encourage our people to be more entrepreneurial, trying to explore new territories, setting up even small businesses in other countries. These are the opportunities that the free trade agreement provides. Because again, as I mentioned, all this market access, generally, my experience, I mean, these are already existing, even without RCEP, even without FTAs. Generally, these market access are there. The one strong value add that you get when you commit this in an FTA is that you're binding. You're already making a commitment that henceforth I will not change this regime, and that provides stability. Now, in the event that you will offer something outside of the legal regime, then that's what I was saying earlier, an opportunity for you to introduce reforms. Because once you introduce something that is outside your BN regime, you are committing that as an international commitment. And under our constitution, the reason why treaties and international agreements are being forwarded to the Senate for concurrence is that we made certain commitments that is beyond our legal regime. So just like in RCEP, we committed that we will protect non-traditional trademark, sound marks, and intellectual property. That is not in our law, but we made such commitment in the RCEP. But since we ratified RCEP, we concurred with RCEP, it becomes international commitment, and under the principle of pacta sunt servanda, you have to pass the necessary law. And that is the value of it. So in other words, we have to understand the context of FTA. And we have to relate that with our existing regime. Because again, there are two different fora when you look at it in this agreement. One is domestic, one is international. That's why it's very important that you have a knowledge of the legal aspect of it and correlate it with the economic aspect. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Gepty. I saw Dr. Rivera raise his hand, but let me go first to Dr. Rodolfo. Prof. Sherilyn, would you have anything to add? Since we were talking a while ago about MRAs, and I think if I am correct, MRAs are also extended to, or it also applies to tourism professionals.
Yes, that is correct. And I think that was also covered in the first paper. But as regards tourism, for example, in our experience in ASEAN, the Philippines has actually developed already a very good a base of, I think, of stakeholders and capacity development programs in order to make our tourism professionals very competitive in the region. So the DOT has also dedicated a separate, let's say, unit or program for that. And I think here in the meeting room, we have also, I think I saw a representative from the TIVFI, the Tourism Industry Board Foundation Incorporated, which has been very active in really building the capacity, the skills of our tourism workforce so that they could benefit from this MRA. But I think I'd like to mention what the first Dr. Tullao and also Dr. Rivera highlighted not only the first paper, but also in the second paper about the limitations that our tourism, let's say, professionals and workforce still face in relation to mobility of, in more especially in the case of RCEP, because of still the restrictions that are still imposed in the other member economies of RCEP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sherilyn. Now we go to Dr. Rivera. JP, you have anything to say?
Yeah, actually, I agree with what Gepty was been mentioning earlier regarding the opportunity. And we can also see now that our paper of Dr. Tullao, our paper has been, the first paper on MRA has been mentioned. I think we can also see MRA. We should not fear or consider MRAs as threats, especially for the domestic workforce. Instead, we can also see it as an opportunity, as a nation, as an economy, to upgrade the educational sector, the curriculum, the skills. Will compel us to upgrade our skills so that we are comparable with our neighboring economies. And one of the requirements in the MRA is actually a check on our curriculum if it is comparable with the educational curriculum of other countries. And with an MRA, our higher educational institutions would be compelled to upgrade their own curriculum on all those 5 professionals that are included or that we have an MRA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rivera. We have another question, which is actually question ko rin ito. We have a question from Dr. Francis Kimba, the director of the PASCN, and it is about the bleisure. No, this was mentioned by Prof. Sherilyn. He said that bleisure is relatively new to him. It's also actually relatively new to me. So can we ask the authors, our speakers, to talk about this some more, and what trends are you observing? Please, who would like, yes, who would like to
crack on that?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yes,
Yes,
po.
Mr. Gutierrez, yes.
So the bleisure segment of tourists actually has been existing for years now, but then we noticed that after the pandemic or during the pandemic, it has become more of a norm, and we see a growing number of this segment increasing. So what exactly are bleisure travelers? These are travelers who are in for business and leisure. So if we notice during the pandemic, work from home setup, virtual arrangements for working have been in place, and a lot of business travelers are now working outside their homes, even outside their offices. We've seen a lot of, for example, destinations. Just for example, in Boracay, during the pandemic, they have like month-long promos that allow these bleisure travelers to actually stay in their hotel for a month. They will be given certain I guess incentives to stay in terms of the pricing, in terms of the internet connection and all of that. So I think we see that this is a trend that will continue over the years, and something that we want to also highlight in terms of RCEP specifically, because once this is ratified, and hopefully this would also encourage more business travelers to come into the Philippines, because we've already tried it during the pandemic, right? It actually works. A lot of us are becoming leisure travelers. So what more if we do open it up to other member economies in that sense? So anything you'd like to add, Dr. Rivera?
Okay. JP, are you okay? I think JP is having some internet issues. Okay, and Prof. Sherilyn, would you have anything to add?
Yes, actually, there is another like segment of this business tourism or bleisure, as we call it, and it's in relation to the investors that are actually coming here, or let's say we have business groups, let's say coming from, let's say China, from Japan, from Korea, who actually come here only, let's say, for a 2-day meeting, right? And they live, right? So the idea is to enable them to extend, even just by, let's say, a day or two, their stay in the country. So this is actually a different segmentation compared to what Professor Ila mentioned, wherein it could also be like a longer period in terms of leisure tourism. So it's like inviting all this, let's say professionals who are members of, let's say, regional headquarters who enter the Philippines, then leave only after a day or two, to actually start experiencing what our country has to offer.
right.
So I think that's another, I think, segment that we can actually capitalize on. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sherilyn. And how is the Department of Trade and Industry and other relevant agencies promoting leisure? As a Gepty, would you like to ask? Any thought?
Well, of course, I'm not really that familiar on that particular aspect. But what I can share, Ms. B, is that tourism is a very important sector because for me, I always look at it as a sector that begets trade or promotes trade also. That's why I always say that tourism begets trade, trade begets tourism.
It's tourism.
So if you want to promote, your products, your services, etc., tourism is one good platform. So I think that's one area also that you should look at because the value, and I agree, sometimes when you host simple seminars, conferences, etc., so basically, it has a lot of collateral positive effects to our economy. So if you are strategic enough, then definitely you can gain more than hosting, and of course the mileage that you earn. So that's how I see it.
Thank you very much, Asek. Now we have an interesting question here from Jasper Keith Nukum. He said, how do we ensure that commercial presence of foreign entities will not put our domestic tourism enterprises at a disadvantage, since it is possible that these foreign enterprises have more resources, among other things? Or are we completely after the idea of opening up our economy to competition under the principle of national treatment? What are the measures, similar with trade remedies and technical barriers to trade, we can put in place to leverage our domestic tourism enterprises? Okay, who would like to take a crack at this question?
Yeah, I'll
Who would
take
like
that,
to
Dr.
start?
Sheila.
Yes,
I'll take
please, Dr. JP.
So
Then I'll go to
regarding
ASEC.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
So regarding this, some sort of protection for our domestic tourism enterprises. I mean, coming from the academic sector, we always believe that timing plays a crucial role with this liberalization, particularly of the tourism industry. Even before RCEP, even before the MRAs have been in place, training has already been required for tourism enterprises, both hard and soft skills, both technical skills upgrading. It has already been given or already offered to our tourism stakeholders so that they would boost their confidence in case a certain agreement like this would happen. And it would be very challenging if training would just begin after ratification, because training would take time. And however, there's still a runway. Training has to be intensive, and it can be provided by both the public and private sector, so that the readiness, that feeling of readiness of our tourism enterprises, that they are able and capable to be able to compete directly with their foreign counterparts. So I think we can begin. We can begin with training of the enterprises.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. JP. And ASEC, Gepty, please go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to share my insights on that particular question, but maybe in a more general sense. Number one is that I think with the current situation right now, the levels of economic development that we have achieved so far, our move to knowledge, creative economy, we have to look at foreign institutions, foreign individuals, foreign professionals in the context of complementation and not competition. Because the fear is that if we open the market, and let's say foreigners would come in, then basically the notion is that these foreigners will be competing in my area of practice. So for example, when you talk about tourism, well, tourism basically inherently has two major aspects. It has an international element and the local or domestic element. So you bring in tourists here, then basically it would work to your advantage if you work with foreign entities or foreign partners, because you cannot also optimally promote your company outside the Philippines without partnering with other foreign entities out there. So that's one. On the domestic aspect, I think that's one niche that I think you can corner, because definitely when you bring in foreign tourists, then there are a lot of areas, there are a lot of economic activities that you can generate and establish a niche. Tourist guides, for example, small and medium enterprises engaged in maybe bed and breakfast, restaurants, and other adventure, activities, etc. So in other words, there are a lot of related activities that you can take advantage of. And going further in a general sense, for professionals like lawyers, for example, although right now we're very strict when it comes to the practice of legal profession, because under our constitution, it's the Supreme Court who has the power to basically give clearance to any opening the market to the legal profession. But we have to bear in mind that the practice of law has several dimensions. So in other words, if foreign lawyers would come here in the Philippines, definitely there are certain areas that local lawyers will have the opportunity to work with them. And usually this will be in the areas of investment, mercantile law, intellectual property, competition. You will not expect lawyers to come in the Philippines and maybe handle cases like, family feud, annulment of marriage, or murder, or homicide, or physical injuries. Definitely, it will be in the area wherein I would say greatly influenced by more commercial and economic activities. In the same manner with our engineer, architects, etc., they will have the opportunity to collaborate working on big projects. And the niche also, in the local market, they will always have that. So that's how we should view foreign competition in our jurisdiction. Thank you.
Well said, Gepty. Okay. Let's go to one of the key findings in the study on tourism, and this is the limited awareness. Limited awareness. We can also say limited understanding of tourism stakeholders about trade liberalization. And one of the recommendations was on having more intensive communication campaigns, more intensive information campaigns about trade liberalization. How do you think can this be, implemented or achieved? For example, are there do we see the participation of, let's say, tourism associations, the government, and how can this be made possible? I saw Miss Ilya nodding his head, so please go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Sheila, I think in terms of one of the recommendations actually that we wrote in the research is that part and parcel of promoting effective communication and information dissemination is really a collaborative approach in terms of from the government down to the local government units. That includes tourism associations as well. It's really about, I guess, disseminating that kind of information in such a way that is readily understood by the stakeholders, because during our interviews itself, it wasn't easy to describe what RCEP is, what trade agreements is for them. They don't really understand what it means to them. So I think that also is the challenge for those who will be communicating RCEP, right, from the government down to the tourism associations. It's really about how do you explain it in layman's term and making sure that they know why it's affecting them and what it means for them.
And I think this goes not only for, those involved in tourism, but also in other, disciplines or other industries, no? Because there's this limited awareness of, the benefits of trade liberalization. Okay, we can have this as our final question. And we have one from Joseph Solis. Should we remove all remaining constitutional restrictions on foreign ownership limitations via constitutional amendment right now if we want to follow the principle of national treatment, not just in RCEP, but also in hypothetical membership in the CPTPP or an FTA with the European Union. Who would like to answer this? ASIP Gepty? You may want to take a crack at this first, then I can ask the others later. Please, sir.
Well, I'll just share my
A tricky
personal
one.
insights view on this.
Mhm.
Number one is that I think the Supreme Court in the case of Tanyada versus Angara already clarified that while our Constitution provides several provisions that are apparently anchored on preference to domestic enterprises, domestic labor, it is also recognized that we have adopted the generally accepted principles of international law and that we did not intend to have an isolationist policy. So in other words, it's a given that we have to open our market for trade and investment. Number two, I think it's worth revisiting, or I would say analyzing the rationale of certain foreign equity limitations in the Constitution. Because, for example, mass media, we have 100% mass media. But we all know that there are four modes of providing services. So if the intent, if you want to control, let's say, the proliferation of certain messages or information in your jurisdiction, that's why you want to have 100% owned media, then I think you have to take into account that in the age of internet, we have mode one services. I mean, the communication line is always open. Foreign entities can always have access. You have access to the news, to the other media platform outside. So I think that is something to reflect on. Number two, as a general rule, we have, of course, 60-40 on certain areas and subsectors. But again, the question is that what's the rationale behind the 60-40? Why 60? Why not 51? Why not 70? Because if you're talking about control, then there are so many ways of control. Voting control in the management of the operation, ownership control when it comes to disposal of your assets. So in other words, even on the categorization and classification of stocks, there are several, I would say, privileges, power granted, depending on the kind of stock that you own. So in other words, that is something that we have to reflect. On advertising, we have the 730. So what's the rationale? Why 70? Why not 60-40? So these are the things that I think we have to take into account in revisiting this foreign equity limitation. And then also, one thing that we have to bear in mind is that in the two major areas, trade and investment, on trade, it's a given that we have opened already our market. Almost all our tariff rates are, I would say, zero or substantially reduced already. In fact, yung mga MFN rates natin, medyo hindi na rin ganun kataasan compared to the MFN rates of other countries. So what does it mean? It means that definitely access to these imported products is relatively easy. You just have to contend with the non-tariff measure. That's it. But when it comes to investment, I think our opening of the market is quite calculated. So it is not as aggressive the way we open our trade. Our market in the investment area is very calculated. So how can you expect, let's say, foreign investors, setting up their manufacturing plant here in the Philippines and producing goods? So I think these are the challenges, especially right now that we are all in advocating to transition to green economy. So as much as possible, you want access to renewable energies, solar power, etc. Now the question there is that who's going to put in money to produce solar? Who's going to put in money to produce, let's say, wind technology, etc. So immediately the easiest way is, of course, to import it. But if you want to encourage more companies to set up their factories, manufacturing plant here in the Philippines, I think you better, come up with a conducive investment environment. So I think that's the way we should look at it. It has to complement, if not reinforce, our existing policies. Because I don't think you can be so open in one area and in the other area you are quite restrictive.
Thank you very much, Asset Hefty. Any additional thoughts from our speakers? Okay, what an interesting, engaging, and lively discussion we just had. So at this point, to cap our discussion, may I ask our speakers for some brief parting words, if you have any? Can we start with our presenters, Dr. Tullao, Dr. Rivera, Ms. Ila Gutierrez? Yes, okay. Dr. Gutierrez already left. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, my parting words is, liberalization is good, but any move in economics, there are opportunity costs. There are some who will sacrifice and there are some who are going to benefit. Now, the task for the government is to manage this cost and benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tullao. And may we hear from Dr. JP?
While
Dr. Rivera?
liberalization would have pros and cons, we can also see liberalization as a way to force us to be able to address our inadequacies, things that we lack, and consider it as a challenge for the total improvement of the services, of the production that we have here in the Philippines.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. And Ms. Ila Gutierrez?
Yes, I think in line with what Dr. Tullao and Dr. Rivera has shared, I think the challenge really is even for tourism in terms of liberalizing tourism further. I think it's not just about being scared, but instead this is the role of the researchers like us. It's actually to examine the situation further so we can identify what are the pain points and how we can actually address that. So I think it boils down to being open and ensuring that this is actually for the improvement as well of the industry. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ila. And Professor Sherilyn Rodolfo, please.
Yes, so any liberalization for me is pressure, which requires response. And any response will generate a consequence. So I think this is where institutions like PIDS and also where the contributions of our authors would be very crucial so that we could craft actually the appropriate response to this pressure. And pressure is actually good. It will actually motivate us to innovate. And that's how I see this RCEP and any liberalization agreement or move is all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rodolfo. And of course, ASEC Allan Gepty, sir, please.
Well, on my part, maybe we have to face reality that we are already in a globalized world. And there is no economic activity concentrated in one country or economy. So in other words, all economic activities are interrelated, interconnected across borders already. And in a complex, interrelated world, I think we need rules. We need certain disciplines. This is very important. And that is why I always advocate that free trade agreements, international agreements are very important. Because in the context of a globalized economy, rules is one good equalizer among different players with different levels of development.
Thank you, ASEC Allan Gepty. And thank you very much to all our guests. Friends, please join me in thanking them through a big virtual clap. And we also appreciate your active participation in the poll and in the open forum. We hope you enjoyed our discussion about the RCEP and learned a lot as well. And here are the winners of our webinar raffle. We have Christina Madlambayan, Jasper Keith Nukum, and Hehe Gabisay, Christina, Jasper, and Hehe. our webinar team will get in touch with you for the delivery of your prize. And finally, we have some reminders. Okay, so you can access all the presentations from today's webinar on the PIDS website, including the author studies, which are available as PIDS discussion papers. In addition, please answer the feedback survey, which will pop on your screen after this webinar. Your comments are important to us to improve our virtual events. Also, please regularly visit our website and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel where you can access the recordings of our events. Thank you for attending our webinars this month. Next month, we have 3 new topics. On May 11, we will talk about future-proofing energy security in the Philippines. And in this webinar, we will feature our studies on electricity supply interruptions in the country and the prospects for developing a nuclear energy program in the Philippines as a possible solution to energy insecurity. Then on May 17, we'll have a hybrid event titled Resilient and Sustainable Future for All, Promoting Circular Economy Through Responsible Consumption and Production. This event is jointly organized by PIDS, the Philippine Apex Study Center Network, or PASCN, and the Asian Institute of Management Rizalino S. Navarro Policy Center for Competitiveness, with the support of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Philippines. And finally, on May 25, we will talk about taxing digital transaction and explore policy solutions for taxation challenges in the digital commerce landscape. Please take note of these webinars and watch out for the registration details, which we will announce on our Facebook page. And finally, we would like to acknowledge the various organizations from the government, academe, civil society, business sector, and international development community, also from the media that join us today. So this concludes our virtual policy forum. Again, our sincerest thanks to all our guests and participants on Zoom and Facebook for your active participation. We hope you'll join us again next month for our new webinars. Maraming salamat po.